Hi folks, welcome to the video. Today we're going to talk about China's transformation. That is its transformation from a communist society under Mao Zedong in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and now they're moving towards a capitalist economy for the past 3 decades. So we're going to look at how that's affected the economy, how the changes have affected the environment, and what kind of political changes there have been also. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about capitalism, socialism, and communism. And if you don't know what those are, there's another video I'm making that's going to describe those to you. So if it's a little confusing, you should check out that video for some clarification. So under the communist government in China, under Mao Zedong in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, farmers, China was mostly farming was the main industry. The farmers could not own their own land, could not set the prices for their crops, and they could not own their own businesses. So when Deng Xiaoping takes over in the late 70s, he reforms all of that, and peasants can now own their own land, set the prices for their crops, and start their own businesses. Within just a few years of instituting those capitalist or free market reforms, productivity in the countryside rose 48%. So the private ownership tapped into the Chinese people, into their entrepreneurial spirit, and they were super productive. Deng Xiaoping also instituted a couple of other changes. He opened up China to foreign companies and foreign investment, and he expanded foreign trade. And he also created these things called special economic zones. And a special economic zone, or an SEZ, would be a city or a small area around a city, a zone, where capitalism was allowed. People could start their own businesses, people could hire and fire people could set their own wages, set their own prices for their goods. And in these SEZs, again, the Chinese economy just took off. There was a lot of foreign businesses would locate factories there. People were getting jobs. So these SEZs became the foundation of the modern Chinese economic boom. There were some definite upsides to these reforms. There were also some challenges and some downsides. For one, the peasants and the poor people in China lost something they called the Iron Rice Bowl. And the Iron Rice Bowl was that the government under the communist system had guaranteed them a job, housing, and health care. And now these free market reforms of this move towards capitalism, they were no longer guaranteed those things. Also, the government planners, the people who had been planning the economy under communism, those folks were losing power to this modern entrepreneurial business class. Also, about 35 million people are unemployed in China now, so that's a pretty big number. But you find that in a lot of capitalist free market countries, you find a certain amount of unemployment. Another thing you see in China is that a lot of farmers, their kids have left the farm, kind of like in Montana, and they move to the cities, and they can't quite find full-time work, but they'll work for a day for a wage for that day. And so those people are called, in China, they call them one-day mules. You can hire them for one day. The last thing, though, you should know is that millions of businesses were started in China under the reforms, and that trade in China in 1979, it was $14 billion. And 2011, it's $1.9 trillion. So that's a huge, huge increase. In fact, with these economic reforms in China, more people were lifted out of poverty in China, approximately 400, 500 million people. And that's more than at any time, at any place in the history of the world that has happened in just 3 decades. So it's been a phenomenal economic success. the reforms have been a phenomenal economic success. Economic growth often has an effect on the environment, just as it did in the United States in the past century. In China, to feed the 330 billion people and clothe them and provide services and electricity and cars and all this stuff, it takes tons of energy. And China burns more coal than the US, Japan, and Europe combined. So it's the leading user of coal in the world. And they also emit about 20% of the world's greenhouse gases. So both of these are problems. It is estimated that 650,000 people in China die each year from air pollution. Those are usually older people, but nevertheless, it's a huge number. It's also estimated that about half the people in China do not have safe drinking water. So those are some challenges China still faces. One result of these challenges, a great thing China is doing, and that is investing tons of money in renewable resources, in research of those resources. So they've invested $52 billion a year, which is the most in the world. Just to give you some perspective, the United States is second, and we invest about $51 billion a year in renewable resources. So what about the government of China? It's still called the Communist Party, yet I've been telling you that their economy is no longer really communist. So this is one of the confusing things. The Communist Party runs China, but their economy is not a communist economy. So they're keeping the name communist, but it's name only. However, it does mean that there's only one party rule. They're not political party systems. They're not elections. You become a member of the Communist Party by studying and working and applying to join. And then once you're part of the party, you can do more work in the government. And then the president of the Communist Party is selected by the top leaders of the Communist Party. So you work your way up, you become a top leader, and then you select whoever the president is. The Communist Party has not wanted to give up control of the country. So they've done several things to kind of keep control, even though the economy is diversifying. One of the things they've done is try to limit the influence of outside information on their people. So they've banned satellite dishes, they censor the internet, they censor foreign news reports, and they try to keep their country from getting outside information. They're worried that maybe it would spark political reform, that maybe people would want more than one party or people would want democracy. Another thing the Chinese government does is that sometimes it represses the freedom of religion. There was a group called the Falun Gong, that the Chinese government thought was growing too big and getting too much power, so they banned it. And they arrested the leaders. They've killed estimated 2,000 members of the group. So that's not great in terms of religious freedom. And that group believes in some variation of Taoism, the Taoist philosophy. Another thing, they've had direct confrontation with people who are advocating democracy in China. The most famous occasion was in 1989. A bunch of students and community members were gathering in the main square in the capital city of Beijing, and they were protesting and they were demanding political reform and democracy. And the government ends up rolling in with tanks and troops, opening fire on the crowd, killing anywhere from several hundred to a couple thousand people. The estimates vary. The government says that it was a small number. The people who were there say it was a big number. During this protest, one amazing thing happened. There was a column of tanks going down the main street, and the Chinese military had been opening fire on people. One guy walks out in the street and stands in front of the tanks and refuses to move. He's known today as the Tank Man. Nobody knows who he is, but he stood there and the tanks tried to go around him and he moved over. And then they tried to go the other way and he moved over. Then he climbed up on the tank and knocked on the door of the tank. Eventually, he left. The tanks rolled on, but nobody knows who he is. But he's this iconic person, and you can see I even have a poster of this event in the back of my room. I'll put a link up where you can watch a short video of the Tank Man if you want to see it. In conclusion, I'd like to just recap that China's economic boom lifted more people out of poverty faster than at any time in human history. There is some changes, though. It's not always good. Some people are left out of the economic boom. So in China today, you can find differences between rich and poor that were not there 30 years ago. You find differences between urban and rural populations. You find differences between business tycoons and human rights advocates and the Communist Party that wants to maintain control. So those are all things going on in China's society today, which makes it a very dynamic and interesting place. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, see me in class.